Hi, welcome to another More Than Walking video podcast discussion, where we seek to encourage dialogue on a variety of topics with the unique perspectives of people with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities. It is our goal for these conversations to make us think critically and for us to all be with a newfound sense of belonging in a world where we have more things in common than we do different. And tonight's topic is democracy and disability. Were you invited to the party? And I'm your host, Corey Feasley. I'm an aspiring hip hop artist here in the state of Connecticut. Before we begin, and I just say my opening, I just want everyone to know, More Than Walking, we just want to hear your views and to be open and honest, but by no means do we endorse any political party. We don't endorse any candidates. We talk freely about policies and things of that nature as far as this discussion is concerned, but we wanted just to put that out to the public that, you know, we stand right in the center as being apolitical. So, did you ever overhear how excited others were to be going to a party, but you were never invited? This should never happen in politics. Yet, according to a study, 7 out of 10 Americans feel there's a disconnect between politicians and the public, with many candidates busy vying for attention by demonizing competitors instead of listening to and problem solving on behalf of their constituents. It's no wonder why people feel they're on the outskirts. The U.S. midterms are coming up on November 8th, where the democratic process is the party, and there are many issues on the table that affect people with and without disabilities. Casting a ballot allows us to participate in this public discourse and crash the party with our vote. So I'm just thankful that you guys were able to make it this evening to discuss the variety of questions that we have. But before we get into the questions, I'd just like for everybody just to take a minute, just to introduce yourself and maybe your level of injury, and we'll go from there.
I'll start it off. I'm Scott Roberts. I'm a C2, C4 incomplete out of Minnesota, and we're expecting rain tonight, maybe snow. Who knows?
Awesome. Get warm.
Hey everyone, I'm Jonathan Sigworth. I'm a C6-7 complete quadriplegic from Connecticut. Glad you're all here.
I am Tahira Johnson. I am C4, C5 incomplete, injured 15 years ago playing roller derby in Chicago, and live in Oklahoma City.
Okay, my name's Jason Thurston. I am a C6 quadriplegic, incomplete as of 18 years ago, and I live up in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State.
Nice. My name is Charles Guidry. I'm had a TBI when I was 12 and walk with crutches, use a power wheelchair outside of the house. And I'm currently running for Arkansas State Senate District 15.
Nice. Awesome. And as I stated before, I'm Corey Feasley, aspiring hip hop artist here in Bloomfield, Connecticut. I am a C4, C5 complete quadriplegic. I sustained my injury 17 years ago, June 12, 2005, in a diving accident while serving in the United States Navy. And I'm, again, just very happy to be gathered with like-minded and maybe, you know, different opinions and different views on subjects. So the premise of this conversation is all about what we are looking for in politics, right? You know, there are so many people all across the United States right now that are advertising. They're having town meetings. They're going from county to county, pitching why they should be the candidate of choice for their district or to represent them on a national scale and a statewide scale, right? But oftentimes that comes with a lot of negativity. It comes with a lot of back and forth, and we can be kind of consumed with it, what we hear in the media, what we think is a lie, what we think is a truth. And oftentimes it leads us to make, you know, our decisions and our choices what we want in leadership. So the first question is, the power of persuasion is an art that politicians practice mastering, both for campaigning and while serving in office. Some of the rhetoric is divisive, and some of it is, you know, substantive. How genuine do you think political leaders are in their desire to see real change occur? And what do you look for in a political leader?
My thought is that there are two types of politicians, right? There are politicians who desire real change, and then there are politicians who want a powerful job, want influence, want attention, and are serving for their own interests, whatever that may be. So, and then there may be a third, a type of politician that goes into it thinking one way and then becomes the other. So I think it's a complex question. But what I look for in a political leader, I think, is someone who doesn't see their primary job as being a politician. Someone who, without their role as representative or their role as senator or president or whatnot, has other occupations that they can do. That they are not wedded to just being a representative, and that becoming in their mind their only way to survive, and therefore tempted to stay in that position at all costs. So I look for someone like that, and then someone who really cares and thinks about people coming from different points of view, from different backgrounds, and really taking that to heart, who is humble, and yet is not scared to speak out about certain things. Someone who's not afraid to educate and vote on unpopular things just because their party is for or against one thing. Who's independent minded.
Like a willingness to change.
Yeah. Willingness to change, willingness to discuss is really important.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it could be, I don't know, a slippery slope, right? Because I think, and Charles, you could probably speak more to this, like you run on a platform of saying that I'm going to stand for these things and be, fixed to those topics, and that's why voters vote you into office in the first place. But then if you're open to change, do you think there's a bit of fear, like you'll lose the voters if you if you want to run for re-election?
Yeah, this is my first time running, and I'm just amazed at how utterly inaccessible the whole candidacy platform is to the average person. Like, I'm running as a libertarian, and because we aren't Democrat or Republican, the state requires us to get like 25,000 signatures every election before we can even run. So we do that, and then we're on the ballot, and we have to go through more hurdles and more hurdles. But it's just so amazing, everything that I've learned running as a candidate. Like when you're driving down the street, you see a little dinky plastic cardboard sign. Those are $10 a piece. A candidate has to raise thousands of dollars just to put signs in a neighborhood. It's incredible how much goes into it from that point. So I haven't been focused too much on fundraising because I'm not going to be out there digging holes in people's yards, sticking signs in. So I'm not worried about that aspect of it. I'm just sticking to social media and putting my platform out there. But yeah, I think that it is a huge problem with the political system as is. Once people get in, they see it as a paycheck. They just have to do the bare minimum to get reelected. Like the seat I'm running for, it's currently held by a senator who was in the House for 12 years, and she can no longer be a representative in the House. So she ran for the Senate seat, and she's been in the Senate seat for 12 years, and she can no longer be a senator because of term limits. So that's 24 years there. So the person she said she's a former teacher, and she's endorsing one of her students who's terming out of the House currently. So she's just sitting in a seat, and it's just cycling the next person through the entire Congress.
Right. It's like somebody that's like preferred rather than having an openness to the voters, essentially.
Right.
Because
right.
that's like a preference. Like, okay, yeah, I've been sitting here for 2 decades, and now I have a student of mine that's coming in, and now I want to endorse them, and it just seems kind of like wishy-washy.
Right.
Let me ask you this question as a person running for office, right? So you know your own heart, and you know that whether it's meaningful for you to search out people because you are really involved in the sense of getting to know people and wanting to see change. But like, if you could like just take your hat off, like as being a politician, and saying the qualities that you possess, are those the same qualities that you found in other candidates from when you voted in the past?
It's hard because and I live in Arkansas and we've had libertarians on the ballot, but this is the first
Right.
year where we really have like there's 50 of us running across the state. So I feel like we've got I feel my views are represented throughout the state, and I am happy voting for that. But I've never felt good representation within the two major parties. So if there hasn't been a candidate running in those parties,
Right.
I don't feel adequately represented, and that's why I decided to run.
Awesome. I like that. I really like that. We're going to end up getting more into that with question 2. Scott, what do you think? What do you look for in a possible candidate who's running for office?
I think in general, I look for honesty and if it's a real person. I agree with what Charles was saying in many aspects. And I had a very close friend that actually ran and won a place in the, I won't get into details of his side and everything, but I asked about his first year in office, and he said, my first week in office was spent up at the Capitol, being introduced, walked around. His second week, he was in meetings talking about how to get reelected. And he went up with different expectations. He thought right away he could start working and doing things. No, they started talking about committees. They started talking about who you're supposed to talk to, who you're supposed to batter up to. And they really weren't interested in what he and who he was representing at the time.
Right.
They were looking at this party threshold. And I think what's frustrating for a lot of people is you're coming into generations where it was Republican, it was Democrat. I mean, families voted that way forever. You go south, I mean, they started having problems where people couldn't marry a Republican, or you couldn't marry into, same as religion. If you were Roman Catholic and you were looking at somebody that was Lutheran, I mean, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And so now it's opened up where there's more variances and more shades of things where, states are purple, they're not blue, or they're not red. But it's still confusing because with the masses comes, how do you please everybody?
Well, isn't the expectancy a little backwards? Like you said, your friend got into office and the first thing they're talking about is trying to run a re-election campaign. I've noticed that with, quite a few politicians. They're like, within the first few months, they're already, putting down and filing for being able to be reelected. But it's like, we haven't even touched base with the issue. Do you remember how your friend got past those issues?
I think the main thing about the issues is just a lot of things get pushed aside. Right. And again, it's a team effort that they talk about, but it's the party they want you to represent. So when you go up there and you're part of a party, you do things for the party. You vote one way, you support one group, a lot of his stuff that was written out for him was decisions already to be made. You will vote this way, this way, this way. And if you had a problem, you had to find somebody that would listen. Otherwise, they'll turn on you. And that's actually what happened to him. I said, why did you end up leaving? He said, I wanted to get out of there with my soul intact, because they were turning him. They were pushing him in directions that he didn't want to go. Or again, I'll support this, just a makeup thing. I'll support the potato farmer, and I want him to do well, and I want to make sure agriculture goes well for the potato farmer. But we're also going to throw in there a raise for all the Senate seats or whatever, and we're going to put all that together. And he said that's where he got angry. He just said, you do one thing and then everything is tied into it. And so when they come out and say, hey, we're for the potato farmer, that's one out of maybe 100 different things attached to that. So it gets complicated and it gets frustrating for people to stay genuine. And I think that's the toughest thing.
Yeah, like you're going against the machine. That's what it sounds like. Tahira, what do you look for in a politician?
Well, considering the times, I look for someone who's not totally insane. Just this side of criminal insanity.
Okay.
It is helpful. And just basically look for someone who's interested in kind of supporting marginalized people and supporting, disabled and other marginalized groups. And at this point, especially now in Oklahoma, really voting for the lesser of two evils in a lot of situations.
The
So,
opening statement, was that a metaphor for just somebody that goes against the grain?
well, no, someone who's more like rational, I suppose, and
Okay.
It's not a real exciting election, this midterm in Oklahoma, but I'll just kind of vote for people I think that would be at least of some assistance. And I didn't vote for a long time prior to my injury in Chicago, which is not unusual. A lot of people in Chicago don't vote, but because I didn't think it mattered that much. But now, I mean, it was President Obama who lifted the ban on stem cell research when he was in office for about 3 weeks. And so things like that make a difference. We should have had that years ago. We should have had it earlier. But, somebody has to do it. So it can make a difference for a lot of people. And
I understand that.
Yeah.
And definitely, like, we need people to think outside of the box, and the choice that we do make will matter. Jason, what do you think? What are you looking for in a politician, and do you think many of them are genuine?
I think a lot of them go into it with the right intentions, like it's been echoed throughout, and they get corrupted by the system. But it's the divisiveness between the two parties that I'm disappointed with, in the sense that if you're on one side, you dislike something just because the other side likes it, and you can't be for one thing and against another if you're on one side. And I think what I look for in a politician is somebody who can work together to come together with a compromise, because that's the only way that real change gets done.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, for me, I don't like the slander. Like, this person pulls out all of this kind of, sometimes it's just garbage and it's unnecessary to slander an individual simply because they differ from your perspective. Whatnot, you can have reasonable debates and you can respectfully disagree on a variety of issues. Do I think that the majority of them are desiring that seat because they can see their policies working for certain groups of people? Yeah, I believe that, but I do think it gets tainted. Again, it's almost like you're going up against a machine of sorts, and especially we have a two-party system, and I was happy that what Charles said, that he's running kind of like on the outskirts of it all, and that's important because he has views and he has a base that needs representation, like all of us, and so I think it's important to just listen to all of them and be able to make your choice accurately. But when they start getting into the mudslinging, it to me turns into it's kind of like disingenuous. So
my question.
Go ahead.
My question is for Charles. This is kind of just open-ended, and so you can fill in the answer how you want. But how much of your past has come up? You don't have to get into any details. Have come up and brought up by others because if something you said when you were 16, or something that you've done that, again, your views were a little different or something at that point of your life. Because that's what I think when we talk about, all the mudslinging, is there is no pure soul in the world anymore. And the internet shows pretty much your life and how you've done everything. And when they get a hold of that information, it's always used for the worst. Right. And that's another thing that they do that my friend mentioned. He said first thing that happened is they had, as much as their party dug into them, the opposing party dug into him. So he had both groups finding out all of his little secrets because they needed to know how to, one, to defend it. The other one needed to know how to exploit it. So Charles, to you, it would be, how has this internet world affected, again, trying to run a clean campaign?
It's a very good question.
Well, I mean, that is a good question. Oh, wait, I'll do the political thing. Thank you very much for that question. It's a great question. But no, I did stand-up comedy for years, and so there's probably some off-color jokes that wouldn't fly nowadays. But everything I've said on stage, I'm not going to, if it's brought up, I will defend it because I said it, and that is, I didn't disparage anybody. All of my humor is self-deprecating, and if I do tell an anecdote or something, making fun of someone else, that person is entirely made up. I do not make fun of anybody that's real. But the thing is, to answer your question, no one cares about state level politics.
Oh,
Like, I've never been asked to debate. I've never been asked for anything. That's why I'm running, because no one cares about state level politics. The guy I'm running against in the House, he didn't vote for half of the legislator votes last session. They didn't even show up for him, and he's running for Senate. And this was his 12th year of being in that position. So, I mean, no one cares enough to ask me anything about my past. So,
I think that's interesting that you said, like, no one cares, because here it is, you're running for that state seat. And so, you spoke a little bit about how you engage in local politics, but as you're engaging in, which one do you care more about, being that you are running for a state seat? Do you care more about the implications of your local politics or national?
honestly, I mean, talks about secession, they're getting brought up. So states becoming pretty important right now.
Okay.
But aside from that, but I never saw a large impact in federal politics until the COVID stuff. I'm like, for most of my adult life, I'm like, the president's there, he's doing things, he's saying things. None of that affects my life.
Yeah.
But as I've seen the workings going on these last few years, and I'm seeing more federalization coming across and sweeping mandates across the country, I think state politics are about to become really important as more states try to wrest some of that policy control back from the federal government.
I see. Jason, what do you think? What do you focus more on, the local or the national?
Well, I think that the more local it gets, the more like real important things. Like a mayor deals with water and electricity and making sure that the plows are out and making sure, stuff that directly affects you. And the further you get away from that, it becomes such a strong policy debate that they focus on 3 to 4 different things, and that's all you ever hear about.
Yeah, that's true. But then, like, when it comes down to dispersing those funds, sometimes I think local politics can cause ripples nationwide, because everybody's focusing, maybe if the person is running for a federal seat in the government, they may in turn say, okay, well, there's one vote. If it gives us the majority, let's kind of, make sure that we're eyeing that candidate. John, which one do you care more about, local or national?
I guess historically I've cared more about national, because one, that's mostly what you hear about in the news, and two, I've always kind of seen like, oh, local government, they're taking care of like the plows and things like that. Like, it just always seemed a little more mechanical and straightforward and less political, so to speak. It's like, okay, let's keep things running. Like, if you're a local politician and you don't do your job, and you, like, if you're a mayor or something like that, and like things start falling apart, you're not going to get that job next year. Like, those are your roads too. So I guess I've always thought about that. But I think now we're kind of seeing, and I'm personally seeing, the importance of local politics, because the last 6 or so years have really exposed how fragmented the democratic process is from state to state. To tag on to question one, I look for a political leader who is willing to compromise, and that includes concede if they lose an election, or abide by democratic processes, and that's currently an open question for a lot of the candidates who are saying that they're only going to accept if their side wins, and that's a real problem on a local level when these people are running for governor or secretary of state or other roles that oversee that process.
Yeah, it's very backwards. I mean, on one end, if you're critiquing the voting, counting, and what have you, but down the ballot, there are seats that you pick up because oftentimes during midterms, the incumbent president, their party may lose seats in both the House and the Senate. So if it's true when your party wins, it has to be true any other time. So if the next, in the next 8 years, whoever is elected to the presidency or voted into the House or voted into the Senate, if that party is the majority, it can't always be cheated. So, Harry, what do you think? Like in Oklahoma, do you focus more like on what's going on in your immediate eyesight, or are you more like, looking at the national implications of some of these policies?
I think I see more about the national politics. I think I'm exposed more to some of the national stuff going on, but I do think the local is pretty important. Although here in Oklahoma, most candidates I would want to win usually won't, but I think they're both pretty important. So, but yeah, I focus on local. I think more recently, focusing on local politics.
When I was working with a nonprofit for the city of next door, Owatonna, I dealt with the city and the chamber all the time. Always had to ask permission, had to have things. So working with the different people on the committees and things like that for if we wanted construction or if we wanted a permit or was really important for me. And these are the same people I'd bump into in a grocery store, or I would, see their family members or something like that. So you're on that one-on-one basis. So if something didn't go my way, you just confront them in the store, and they'll hate you for that. But that's my only real time to get a hold of them. And then you look at that as being the most important things to you locally. I agree with everybody. The federal, the state level is what we live, and then what we see on TV. They can say what they want. We know if crime is up in our area. We know if we're seeing the difference in the price of food. We know all that. And then they start these fights about things, democracy is good. Well, what do you mean democracy is at risk? I just hear so much about it. It's like going, I'm more worried about, just the personal, for instance, about violence in different states. Minneapolis, you got a huge problem with violence and just crime in general. I wanted to go up to the Twin City Con, which is like Comic-Con for Minnesota, and I had a van ride plan to go up there, and the guy canceled it. And I said, "Why?" He goes, "I'm not going up there. They'll steal my catalytic converter." And I said, "Well, no, they're not." He goes, "I was sitting in my car when they were trying to do it."
Wow,
so it touches you.
Of fear.
You live in fear, but fear that you didn't have before. That's what makes you emotional. Is I didn't have that problem.
Right.
We're coming up on Christmas, and my kids love the Mall of America. I said, I'm not going up there. Every other weekend, somebody gets pulled out with a gun, and the problem is when they have the gun in the mall, they shut the entire mall down, and everybody's locked in.
So I mean,
not what I want to do.
That's one of those examples. I think that sways voters, right? You can have a bad experience, and then if it becomes a national issue, gun rights, for instance, if you are living somewhere where not much crime is committed, right? You may not be as empathetic as if somebody else is going through something, like you said in Minnesota, where this gentleman is like, "Listen, I'm worried about, this part on my car being stolen. And for you, it's not directly affecting you per se, but you're like, nah, that's not going to happen. He's like, no, wait a minute, this is what happened to me. And then we get swayed when they come on and then they say, well, in these blue states, there is an epidemic of crime. It's causing all this disproportionate maltreatment of its citizens, or, you know, in a red state, they just want to open carry and they have no regard for life because they're so focused on it. But when people have like interpersonal experiences with it, I think that's really needs to be the motivating factor when you are pursuing someone that looks like, you know, a viable candidate. I'm sorry that your friend experienced it, because I know here in Connecticut and, you know, some of the surrounding areas, that has been a big problem where people like, you know, next town over have been stealing catalytic converters, taking cars, etc. They even is a TikTok challenge where people are breaking into Kias. And recently, not here in Connecticut, another state, I think it's New York. I don't know if Jason, you heard about it. I think it happened in Buffalo. But like some children stole a car, right? And 4 out of 6 of those teenagers end up passing away, right? So then you look at, how do we elect politicians that are going to steer children, you know, in the right way? Because what we make decisions as adults ultimately affects the children as well.
Continuing on with that, what you were just saying about violence again, a lot of local things that happen, and you got, you know, the George Floyd incident that happened in Minneapolis is, you know, horrible. But the way it's being treated now is when the government officials are now getting involved. They're actually turning that gas station into a shrine for George Floyd. Mm-hmm. Now, the sad part is I've read the story about the owners of that gas station that were put out of business because it was in the middle of a huge disputed area where the police weren't allowed to go into. Mm-hmm. And the police backed off, and we had a district police precinct burnt down during rioting. Yeah. And that's where we look at the state government and say, how come you didn't do anything, Mr. Governor? And that's where we start getting involved. Is like, going, wait a minute, that's trickle down, because now all those people that live in that area around the soon-to-be George Floyd shrine, they didn't want it or ask for it, but now they are going to be visited constantly. And their lives are already upheaved. They're, you know, they can't move because they can't sell their homes, and they're just there, surrounded by, for the longest time, violence. And it's like, why doesn't our government jump in there and do something? Why isn't somebody seeing the little man's point of view, which is, my kids can't go outside, nobody walks your dog anymore, you know, and that aspect of it. So it's getting to the point where it's filtering down, and you say, okay, that comes from the federal government down to state government, all the way down, and we feel the brunt of it.
I understand. So, I mean, John, like in your experience, you know what I mean, like just being disabled, running a small business, et cetera, when you think about something like that, where a miscue or just outright, you know, issues with police, let's say you have a brick and mortar establishment and there's like some issue like that, and people protest, and then it turns into the rioting, and the frustration in your brick and mortar gets torn down as a result of the outrage of the community. Do you see yourself being able to say, I can understand what they're going through and vote for somebody that represents them? Or would that sway your opinion on who you would vote for?
You asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I were in that situation, I would be upset to leave my shop. I mean, it would be devastating, of course. But if we're talking about, you know, violence and the origin of violence, you know, we've mentioned a couple of things. There's, you know, community supports that exist or that could exist that can help get violence off the streets. There's better training of police officers to engage in that community, like we talked about last year. You know, if the officer hadn't been so cruel and murderous, you know, that wouldn't have been an issue. George Floyd was a patron at that very shop, and he was killed because of a suspected counterfeit $20 bill. You know, he was murdered for $20. So who wouldn't riot on the street, in my opinion? Like if that happened to your community, like that happens to you, your neighbor, I mean, if your neighbor was murdered for $20, we should all riot on the street. But of course, we shouldn't have to do that. That shouldn't have to happen. And I mean, I'll blur into to question 3.
But before you do, if I
Oh
could
yeah,
just push back on that huge disagreement. George Floyd was murdered over $20. Yes. If you have a problem with George Floyd being murdered over $20, how does rioting solve that? How does burning a third-party business down, how is that of any consequence to George Floyd? I mean, the rampant riots for cities across the country burning down unrelated businesses just seems entirely unrelated, just an excuse to be chaotic.
yeah. I didn't mean to be defending by riot. I didn't necessarily mean the burning down of structures. I'm sorry. I should have said protest. And I mean, the vast majority of those protests were peaceful, but there were riots as well, which I don't agree with. But especially a perspective that I heard that was really helpful in understanding it is, there is such a thing as built up pressure for communities that feel constantly oppressed, and I mean, that's what leads to armed conflicts, right? Like in general. And so anything that can be done to relieve those pressures, it's not like we can't, like that happened, right? Those riots happened, but they happened for a reason. Like it wasn't that there wasn't pressure there. You see what I mean? Like the people who participated in those things were motivated by something, and it wasn't just the desire to destroy something. It was a feeling of injustice. And if we want to prevent those things from happening again, we need to focus on the root of that injustice, the root of that pressure.
Charles, how do you quell like public fear, right? Like sometimes politicians address things after it happens, but there's always mounting pressure to do something beforehand. How do you quell public fear of what they think is to come? I mean, there have been reports throughout this year of, obviously we know what happened on January 6th. For them, they felt outraged. They felt like the election was stolen. And I'm not saying that you agree with rioting at the Capitol, but then what happens when leaders exacerbate a public sentiment instead of doing it peacefully? How do you stop that?
You don't. I mean, you mentioned January 6th rioting at the Capitol. There was rioting at the Capitol from BLM during Trump as well.
Right.
That Trump had to go hide down the bunker, and the rioters burned the church across the street from the White House.
Right.
Again, completely unrelated. As a libertarian, our main platform is to reduce the size of government and direct focus back towards individual responsibility, which would be to encourage people to buy a gun for self-defense. That's pretty much what it boils down to, because if you look at the crime that happens, it happens when people are allowed to commit it. The rioters take to the streets for peaceful reasons, as was brought up, and then one person throws a brick through a window, and everyone looks around, and that person who threw a brick, nothing happens to him. So another person throws a brick through a window, and when people realize there's no consequence for their actions, that's when it gets out of control.
You don't necessarily encourage civic justice, people taking it into their own hands, when you talk about like encouraging people to like carry a weapon.
Like if I were to own a business and a mob outside were to be throwing bricks through the business window and threatening my life while I'm inside, yes, my life is threatened. If they come through that business, I am in a position where I either put them down or I die, like the people that were killed in the BLM riots.
I understand that.
I believe that people have a right to self-defense in all circumstances.
Some, like, for Charles, he encourages, the right to defend yourself, right? Now, watching what happened in Minnesota, seeing that, would that sway your opinion in terms of watching something like that occur, would you vote for somebody that's for a person protecting themselves if something was to happen to them in that type of setting?
Well, of course, everyone has the right to self-defense, but to be upset about the riot, I mean, I certainly hope that the violence, if someone's upset about the violence that happens after a riot, because of a riot, I certainly hope they're as concerned about the violence that happens when a police officer can just kill someone on video, staring at the camera while choking someone out. I certainly hope they were as upset about that violence.
Of course.
And when you have that kind of injustice carried out by the police, you should go ahead and expect violence. You should go ahead and expect that.
Okay, I understand that. Jason, what are the issues that are motivating you to vote, and why are they important to you as it relates to what we were just talking about?
Well, I think it's important to vote for the most sane candidate, but no, all aside, the abortion right thing is huge. For someone to tell another person what they can or can't do with their own body based on their religious beliefs is just absurd. So that's a big one, and I think that people who support marginalized members of society and those who could use a hand up as opposed to a handout is very important.
Scott, how about you?
What's that?
I was saying, Scott, what are some of the issues that's motivating you, and why are they important to you?
Basically, what we're talking about is everybody has an opinion, and we're going to find the candidate or the group that's going to best represent my voice and everybody's voice up there. So motivation is change, and change sucks. Everybody on this phone call right now understands the meaning of change more so than most people. And at one point, we all had to make a change, and we do it every day. But I think what we're looking for as a society is change for the better. As much as we don't like to see it constantly put in our faces, that's what they give us all the time. And with the internet and other things so local, I mean, what used to be something you never heard of because it happened in Oklahoma is what I watch instantly on TV first time I turn it on. And just about with every state. So it's no longer, it seems like it's everywhere constantly. And it's pushed that way for a reason. Because both sides, one that wants to defend it and one that wants to say that it's not happening, but it's there. So again, it's the people like us that are sitting there trying to grasp at the understanding of how am I going to get through the next year.
Yeah.
And again, are they going to cut benefits? Are they going to cut things that we need at government level where, it's going to start affecting ADA, anything like that? You were talking, I think our last conversation, the supply chain is, how much is that really affecting us here at a personal level? Right. I'm still waiting for medication. They keep telling me, we're out, we're going to get some. And I said, can you go to another place and get it? Because I really need it. I'm supposed to be taking it. Yeah. And they just said, we're out. I'm like, I've never heard of you guys being out of this.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've read articles about people having to ration insulin. You can't take your daily dose, so now you're rationing it because you just don't know when the next dose is going to be able to be available. So that's a real threat. It's a very real threat.
I just wanted to add one more quick thing. If you want better health care nationally, I would be careful about asking for smaller government. You can't have it both ways. So,
there's just, sorry, was that you, John?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important, everyone who's listening, we're going to try to publish this before November 8th, obviously, so hopefully tomorrow. But everyone who's listening, I think a really important test that no matter what your political persuasion is, to just double check who you're voting for is to ask, okay, what do they say that they're concretely going to do to help you? And are they doing that, or are they spending all their time focusing on demonizing the other person? And the other thing on that point is, we hold all these very specific, strong values, right? Like, we're probably represented here, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, gun rights, abortion rights, right? But it's also really important if we're going to survive in a democracy to understand how our interests, if applied on a national scale, how that affects other people. For example, if we take a complete liberal view on gun ownership, for example, we need to recognize that all 70%, more than 50% of the arms that are flowing into Mexico and in South America are all manufactured in the United States. We are fueling the migrant crisis on the southern border through massive arms production. That's just one example. We have climate change that's barreling down at us that we absolutely cannot ignore, even if fuel prices are up. So it's like all these different factors. So that's kind of what's motivating me is to look at like the larger long-term implications and try to figure out the best from that.
Yeah, and I think that's the the meat and potatoes of this conversation is that your view represents your local constituencies. My view represents my local constituencies. But just because where we are when we vote, whenever, November 8th, 4 years from now, doesn't mean we don't migrate and don't move to other parts of the country. So we then see why those issues are important. I could feel one way here in Connecticut, move to Arkansas and be like, man, Charles is right about whatever issue, because now I see it from his perspective because I'm immersed in it. And I think the implication of who we vote for has such a profound effect on people later on. Prime example, with the crime bill, right? It led to the mass incarceration of Blacks and Latinos and other people of color. At the time, it was right? But you fast forward, 20 years from that, then you see that it's a problem overflowing of prisons. It's hard to deal with prisoners. When the COVID crisis came up, and then you even look at like legalizing marijuana. People were being jailed for it before. Now people are being released on account of now people profiting off of it. So I think the implications are very wide and pervasive. So what we do right now is important. Like Jonathan said, double check your priorities for whomever you're voting for, because it could be your aunt or your uncle or your brother or your sister down the line that's affected simply by, whatever person that you voted for. But in closing, I just want to thank again everybody for participating in this discussion. It's very much needed from the perspective of people with disabilities, because we have thoughts, we have opinions, and those opinions matter just as the next person. I think we need more accessibility to voting. What Charles was alluding to, and I can get with that, even though his politics are different from mine here in Connecticut. I can represent that, because that's a view that should be held by everyone in the office. Well, again, guys, thank you so much. Charles, I hope you fare well in your campaign. Scott, I hope you get the supplies that you need, and overall,
I hope so
that are affecting all of us. We just need our leaders to know that they're real problems for the small person, per se, in quote, and for the large person. Like I said, in our Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that's where we need to, keep the conversation. But listen, thank you guys.
And women.
Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
I said, and women.
Yeah. We got to rep for the ladies, for sure.
What I'm talking about.
Exactly. Listen, thank you guys for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Stay tuned and join us next month, and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next. Until next time, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else, be aware. Take care, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.